going to start.
So we should have folks joining.
Oh, hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just gonna give folks a couple minutes to come in. In that time, our good friend and colleague behind the scene, Jacob, will play one or two videos, but we're gonna give folks time to come in. You know, the internet connection speed and all that, sometimes there's a little lag, but thank you all. If you're just joining us, this is the What Investors Want series, and we're super excited that you're with us today. Thank you for spending your afternoon or evening with us, depending on where you're signing in from. Thank you.
Okay. We usually like to have people tell us where they're joining from in the chats, just to see how our audience is. So you can let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from while we wait for folks to join. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Got Lagos, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, Rwanda. Wow. Area. Awesome. Wow. Oklahoma City. Wonderful. Abuja. Montreal. Port Harcourt, Nigeria. Oh, thank you. Thank you all. We tend to always have a lot to cover in these webinars, so we're going to dive right in today. Let me go ahead and thank all of you for joining us. We truly appreciate the time you're taking out of your schedule to listen to what we have to say and what really our guest, Kola Aina, has to say today. This is the last episode, if you will, in our pilot series of the What Investors Want. It's something that the Clayton Christensen Institute and the University of Toronto Entrepreneurship Center have collaborated on. And we really asked a simple question. We wanted to better understand what investors wanted. Part of our goal is to make it a little bit easier for entrepreneurs to understand what investors want so that they can design their solutions in such a way that they can get investments, the much needed capital, to build the kinds of companies and enterprises that can ultimately create prosperity. My name's Efosa Ojomo. I'm at the Clayton Christensen Institute, and my partner in crime also happens to be Efosa Obano. He's at the University of Toronto Entrepreneurship Center. We jokingly call him Efosa #2, but it's more so Efosa 2.0. And you all know the 2.0 versions are always a lot better than the 1.0 versions. And so thank you so much for this collaboration opportunity at Efosa. It's been a pleasure to work on this with you.
Thank you. Very excited for the last episode of the pilots. We've learned so much from all the episodes, and this one I've looked forward to the most. Big fan of Kola and the work he's done, and I guess selfishly him being Nigerian, so you get to hear a lot from it.
Awesome. Well. Yeah, and one of the things we're gonna do next year is, we're recording these sessions. We're gonna compile them, put them together, and make them available to you. And we'll figure out some of the really important snippets so that it's easy for you to navigate and get access to this information. We have a lot of big plans launching this sort of series full blown next year. But you didn't come here to listen to me. You came to hear from Kola. So we're gonna dive right in. And Kola, we typically just like to start by having you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your fund, and one important question is, like, why did you become an investor? I'm sure when you were 7 years old, you didn't know, mommy, daddy, I want to become an investor. Like nobody at that age that I know says that. Like we all want to be, whether it's a teacher or a doctor or an architect, an engineer. I never heard any, I want to be an investor. So introduce yourself, tell us about your fund, and then help us understand why you want to become an investor.
Sure. FOSA 1, FOSA 2, Jacob, and thanks for having me. You guys are incredible, and it never gets old having these conversations with you. Thanks to everyone in the audience from all over the world. Delighted to be here. My name is Kola Aina, Nigerian national, really proud Nigerian. Even if we're on the UK red list, I remain relentlessly proud. Grew up in the northern part of the area, in what I often describe as a startup foundry. My father was a buckling entrepreneur who tried his hand on a number of enterprises early years, up until he sort of settled on what ended up being his most successful business, a publishing business. And so I like to say I had a front row seat into a highly sort of entrepreneurial sort of environment. I call it my home was literally a startup foundry, because my dad was always building one new venture. And every time he faced a challenge and they failed, he would sit down with my mom and they would go through what they could do better and what happened and all of that. I spent my summers and my holidays. Well, we didn't call it summers back then in Nigeria, except when you went for summer holiday in London. I spent my holidays literally working in whatever the current family business was. So very traditional middle class type family. When it was time to go to university, I was fortunate enough to have a chance to go to the US for university, really just went through that, worked in finance for a while, but always sort of had my side gigs. I always had a startup I was running or building on the side. And then in 2008, I went on my first fundraising adventure, trying to raise venture capital for a business I was trying to run. And that was at that time, there weren't too many options to raise funding in Nigeria. And that turned out to be a really challenging encounter. And to be honest, it was at that point that the seeds for making access to capital muscle-free for more people became, the seed got sown at that point, right? Because I couldn't imagine how difficult it was to raise capital for something I believed really strongly was going to be fantastic. And so from that point on, my mission became trying to be successful enough that I could invest my own money, and then maybe one day convince people that I could invest their money. And I spent sort of the first the decade just focused on building my technology business in Nigeria, to where I could now start investing money as an angel investor in the first instance, before that sort of grew into Ventures Platform, which Ventures Platform is an early stage Pan-African discovery fund. We call ourselves a discovery fund because our sweet spot is really identifying high potential winners early before they become very obvious. We invest in them when it's not yet very obvious, and we support them as they scale. We cover the African continent primarily, and I think one of the reasons FOSA has invited me here is our thesis is actually based on to be honest, in the beginning, we didn't realize this. We knew that we were looking to invest in companies that were building innovations that can meet the needs low income mass markets. That's the way we described it then. And we knew that they needed to rethink how they delivered goods and services. But in reading Fosa's book, I'm really proud to say our thesis today is really around funding market creating innovations that tackle non-consumption in emerging markets, primarily in Africa. We're invested in about 7 companies across the continent, and really proud of the portfolio. There's a number of category leading companies in the portfolio. We were also proud that we have a track record of exits across the portfolio. And yeah, super excited to do what we do in the market at this time. Thank you very much. I love jazz. I love art, and I'm really passionate about Africa. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Yes, Kola is an avid art collector. I wanna latch onto something you said before I pass the baton to my brother Fosa. You talked about why you even got into this work. And you talked about wanting to help entrepreneurs better raise the capital, because you really struggled in 2008 when you were trying to raise capital for a business that you thought was going to be viable and exciting. And I want to latch onto that because I think, I could be wrong, but investors have a certain kind of a reputation. Investor, that word investor is, it's not a word that incites exciting feelings for most people, to be honest. It's not a word like teacher or doctor or nurse. I think part of why we're doing this series is not only to humanize investors and to say, look, they have a story as well, but it's to also help people see, like, what are their motivations, and really connecting your investment journey and story to the struggle that you had in '08. I hope is a message to entrepreneurs that in many ways, there are, as much as there are investors out there who are sharks, who are not trying to really help, I think there's a good number of investors out there who feel your pain, your struggle, and truly want to help you succeed. And so thank you so much for sharing that. We'll talk a little bit more about market creating innovations later on, but I just wanted to highlight that point. Fosa, over to you.
Very well said. Very well said. Thank you for that great intro, Kola. Quick housekeeping for the folks listening. In real time, if you have any questions, just use the Q&A box, or the Q&A tab there to ask them. We usually spend the last 20 minutes-ish trying to get through as many audience questions. And as Kola is speaking, we can try to tailor his conversation towards some questions in real time as well. So feel free to chime those in. So my question would be, taking the position of a founder, so obviously working with Black founders at U of T, working with African founders through African Impact Initiative, this question would really resonate with a lot of our group and folks that are here. So practically speaking, what steps should an entrepreneur who wants to raise capital from you take to get your attention? Or I guess put in another way, what are the important traits you like to see in entrepreneurs? How would you answer that?
Great, thanks. Well, first off, to be honest, so my motivation was initially wanting to solve a problem that I had when I was trying to fundraise, but it's moved from just that to become a job. And so I want to say that today I actually consider it a privilege to invest in a great founder. And so when I was thinking about this question, because again, with the kinds of investments that we make, we're not doing private equity. We're not very deeply involved in the company. So a lot rides on the quality of the founder. And so it's literally a blessing to identify the right founder at the right time and cut a large enough check or keep cutting checks into the business. And so in thinking about the question around what founders should do to get my attention or our attention, frankly speaking, I think founders just need to build a great business, right? To be very honest, I find a lot of people, founders, want to over-optimize for investors. The real trick is actually to over-optimize for customers and build products that customers love, gain traction, and just have evidence that this thing is a success, or is heading in the way of success. Because in the world we live in today, you've got capital allocators like myself, and I hate that phrase, but it describes the point very adequately, who are looking for alpha. And I get evaluated by the quality of my capital allocation. And so that's broadly how I like to think about it. And frankly speaking, if we ended this conversation here, if all the founders left with was realizing that the trick is actually to optimize for your customers and growing your customer base, I think we would have done a great job. Now, to break that down into a bit more detail, I think on top of that, you now have the mechanics of discovery, right? Because we live and operate in a world today where there's so much entrepreneurial activity. There's literally in any market, there's tens of examples of every product vertical. Everyone's building a buy now, pay later product. Everyone's building a dating app. And so one of the things that once you've sort of built your MVP and you have traction, I think it's really important to think about how you socialize the opportunity, and we can talk about that for an entire day. But what I find to be really useful from an investment discovery standpoint is really warm introductions, right? So you've got a great company, you've got the right traction. We take applications on our website, for instance. But the way relationships work is that whenever a founder is introduced to me by a FOSA or anyone else that I respect or that I have a relationship with, I presume that they've done that they've passed this company through a filter. I mean, there's a couple of people that don't pass things through a filter. They forward everything at you, but I presume they've passed this thing through a filter because I'm seeing hundreds of pitch decks every week, right? So, I'm using various methods to sort of filter the traffic. And I think that's one thing that founders can often do really well, is identify linkages either through your founder network, your mentors or mentees, or just LinkedIn, right? Identify people that are connected to them, that you're connected with, and having them do an introduction. The additional benefits of that is that to cross that introductory hurdle, you've literally had, typically a good introducer will do some diligence and ask some questions, because they also don't want to burn their bridge. And so you've sort of, you also gain a chance to sort of get some feedback on the company that you're trying to build. But personally, I mean, I guess, traction is key for us. We're also really keen on, because we're investing in capital. Again, if you understand our thesis, you would understand that we're looking to invest in capital efficient businesses, right? So I'm looking for businesses with large and growing markets where the cost of customer conversion and customer education is reasonable. I'm looking for positive unit economics. Because when we invest in Africa, we want to ensure that the business models can be profitable on the basis of one unit, as opposed to saying we'll get profitable at scale. And this doesn't mean we're not long-term oriented. It doesn't mean that we want you to show profitability day one, but we want to be fundamentally sure that the business model itself is watertight. And then ultimately, we often talk about identifying positive offline indicators that supports the core thesis of the business. People are not.
That's a big term, positive offline. See, that's why these investors, they use these terms, positive offline indicators. Please, break it down.
Well, one way to put it is humans are objects of, are creatures of habit, right? Objects of habit, scripture, yeah. And so you're not going to build an app and change people's habits overnight, right? You could easily you could do that. You could be Steve Jobs and convince us all that we now need little things in our pockets with thousands of songs in them. But that's a different kind of innovation. And if also I can talk about that, right? Because when we invest in Africa, the share of wallets is very thin. So you're competing with food, with shelter, and with all sorts of things. And so people's behavior modifications is very tied to their reality and the hard problems they need to solve. And so the way we like to think about that is there evidence that the behavior that is required to support this business at scale does some basic offline version? Again, this is assuming that you're building an online technology-enabled innovation. Is there some basic offline version of it that lends itself to that at scale? And so that's basically how I break that down. I hope, in a nutshell, traction, large growing markets, evidence of positive offline indicators, figuring out how you socialize it to the right investors. And I guess I would say the quality of the team. I often wouldn't look at a startup. I wouldn't invest in startups that don't, for instance, if you're building something that is very technology dependent and you've outsourced your tech, that's always a red flag for me 100% of the time. I would never invest in something of that nature, like you're outsourcing your tech, or, it has to be in-house. And so we can spend hours talking about this, but I'll pause here.
Yeah, and very, very well said. And I think it's very interesting. And for someone, you also probably remember this, but we've gotten that like socializing, networking effect answer from all the investors we've interviewed, where it's like, warm intros are likely to work stronger than, that online form on the website. So I think, for lack of, like, at the risk of saying this and saying this again and like a broken drum, like founders on the call, we need folks to, spend a lot of time investing in building your network, building your network of investors, building a network of folks that are also in the VC space, and attending sessions like these, where you get to learn from them. So I think that's a very big thing that we've been getting, the warm intros, and, summarizing everything else like you did, very important for, the team, very important for POI. Oh, sorry, I think my audio is a bit...
Efosa, I don't know if you're, if you can increase, I don't know how you do that, increase your volume, but...
Okay, I will fix that. But yeah, you can take the next question while I do that.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you. Beautiful summary. There was something you said that I also want to just latch on to, and it's connected to what Clay Christensen taught us. Every business gets capital from two people or two entities, investors or customers. Investors give you capital so you can grow the thing, design a good business model, but they're not trying to pump in money in perpetuity. They give you money temporarily. Customers can give you money until they die and even after they die. And something you said about entrepreneurs building business models, not simply to attract money from investors, but from customers, will have this unintended consequence or effect of magnetizing as much dollars as they can from investors, right? So build for the customers, the investors will come. You build for the investors, neither the investor nor the customer may come. So thank you for that. That just took us back to something Clay taught me. I tell people 97.3% of the things I know I learned from Clay Christensen. So there you go. Social capital is important. So something else I think Efosa 2.0 was talking about that. Social capital is key. We actually have a researcher on our team who works on social capital. Her book, Who You Know, is incredibly important. Now, she focused on education, that space, but Who You Know is incredibly important. The next question is really related to this one, and it's about what else do you consider? So you assess individuals and their ideas. Oh, it's awesome, but what other factors do you consider before you put in an investment? For example, are you looking at, oh, this country, the last two investments we put in didn't go well, and so you found a good founder, but like the country is just like bad juju. Like, what else do you assess, right, before you go in, outside of the founder?
Sure, great. Thanks. I think one thing that we didn't used to assess in the beginning, but has become critical for us as we've gained experience, is what we like to call underlying infrastructure to support the business. And I think case in point is if you think about e-commerce in Africa, for instance, the reason e-commerce is so successful in China and the US is because you've got the underlying infrastructure like logistics, you've got credit systems, you've got identity, you've got all of these things, and so we started thinking about this a couple of years ago, and we went back and we said, look, if you think about the digital economy, you've got to think about it as layers. And so today, when companies approach us and when we're having these investment conversations, we're often asking ourselves, what are the enablers? What enablers does this business require to scale? And where we can't find those enablers in the right quantum or in the right sequence, we're often weary of investing, because what that suggests is that the company would have to try to backwardly integrate, and clearly that increases the capital requirements, in a market where we're still sort of growing access to capital. So that's one thing that we really spend a lot of time. And I think entrepreneurs would do good to say, look, what are the ecosystem of other companies I would need to collaborate with? Thankfully, we have a fast-growing API ecosystem where obviously it's a digital startup, but that's one thing that we look at. In Africa, we also look very closely at what we call the regulatory landscape. And this doesn't suggest that we won't invest in regulated entities. No, we actually think there's a reason certain sectors are regulated, because they've been proven, right?
Yeah.
Proven sectors are the ones that get regulated, and a proven sector suggests that there's demand and you're likely to make money. And so we often assess the regulatory risk and we try to understand it, but that doesn't suggest that we won't invest. And I think it's really important that founders really think, there's this fallacy that regulation should not exist, and that regulation is the enemy. And I think the sooner founders realize that, look, you're going to be regulated, especially if you intend to scale in any way. Governments have a responsibility to protect citizens. What's important is understanding the regulatory landscape, figuring out the timing for when you fall under regulation and all of that. So again, just recapping, I talked here about the underlying infrastructure the company needs, which in some cases could be other types of companies, other types of businesses. So for instance, we wouldn't have PiggyVest in Nigeria with 3 million users today if we didn't have Paystack, and so we invested in Paystack, and then we now have PiggyVest. Really proud of both portfolio companies, actually. And the second thing is, just assessing the regulatory landscape. The third thing we do, we like to look at as well, is really, in Africa particularly, we like to look at the ability for companies to scale across regions, or as we say, become Pan-African, right? Because you've got to think about Africa in regional blocks. So the West African bloc, the Francophone bloc, where there's a common central bank regulator. You've got to think about the Southern bloc. And the question we often like to look at, because if you're thinking about venture returns at scale, you need large markets. So how transferable is this product or service within a region or across regions? Is also something that we look at from a scale perspective. So I've identified 3 things, and I hope that sort of shed some light.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's very eloquent. So underlying infrastructure, regulatory landscape, and can this scale across regions? Thank you for breaking that down. Efosa, over to you, sir.
Sir, just making sure. Audio check.
We can hear you.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so the next question would be also practical from, I guess, a founder's perspective. So would like to hear examples of 2 deals. You can be as discreet or as, revealing as you want to be on each, but one that your firm actually decided to invest in, and one that your firm passed on. And for each, like, the key deciding factors that led to, you guys making those decisions, from even just like how the deals came about, the whole cycle. And then kind of combining the follow-on question to that as well, because you could also add that in your answer in terms of how you've supported them, since you invested. But yeah, would love to hear.
I can help you with this if you're thinking of one. If you can talk about Paystack.
Everybody wants to hear about Paystack.
Because everybody's looking at Paystack today saying, Paystack, of course. But my guess is Paystack didn't look like Paystack when you invested in them.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, but talk about whichever one. But I thought that could just
no. Well, you've asked for it, so we'll talk about it.
All right.
So I actually related very closely with the pain point Paystack was looking to solve when I met Shola in 2016, 2015, I can't remember now. And this was because in my technology business, our biggest pain point was helping the businesses we served collect payments online. It just never worked. We actually had a provider at the time in Nigeria. I wouldn't name the name of this company, but you had to fill a long paper form. You had to register, and then you actually paid to get set up to collect payments online. And here, you paid to be configured, right? Configuration fee. And here I meet this guy who says, look, I built this thing. We can have businesses up and running in 30 minutes at 0 cost, because we'll basically charge a percentage of it's like, this is obvious. Now, mind you, he had spent months, trying to fund, or close to a year trying to fundraise in Lagos, and Shola was a phenomenal guy. Just the humility, the clarity of thoughts, and just slam dunk obvious. To be honest, obvious problem, but no clear path to success. Right? There was no guarantees that this would work. But was clearly a bet on the acute need. And at that time, it was very obvious to me that if this worked, it would create a new segment, and that's what it's done. Today, the company supports close to 100,000 merchants, and today is supporting a new layer of companies across the continent. Like I said earlier, you wouldn't have the likes of PiggyVest if not for the likes of Paystack. You wouldn't see you wouldn't. I mean, I shudder to imagine how we would have been so resilient with COVID and paying for tests, and like, it's incredible to think all of this. You couldn't do this 5-6 years ago in much of Africa. And so it's an incredible journey with them. Obviously, as you all know, the company got acquired by Stripe last year in a pretty public acquisition, which was great for everyone involved. We tend to be pretty hands-on with our companies around things like regulatory support, helping out understand the regulatory landscape. We stay really close to the regulators. And we try to create that bridge. We try to intervene with their challenges, everything from helping with strategy and just being a sounding board, helping with recruiting, helping with business development. For some companies, we would make introductions. Some companies will go to meetings with them. We like to be as hands-on as the companies want us to be. And this, we think, really makes value much more than the capital that we bring on board. I would talk about a company where we passed, right? as you asked for. So deal came in through an introduction, and the solution was very clear, clearly articulated. The market potential was also quite clear, but I think in certain companies, particularly where the companies have hired their first set of employees, we often sometimes would look to engage with the founding team with a couple of their employees just to check the dynamics, right, in the team. And I think in this particular case, it was clear that the dynamics were off. One of the founders was really condescending and rude to the rest of the team, and that we just couldn't get over that hump, right? Because the most important job of the founder or the CEO in the early stages is just keeping everyone aligned and inspired. And at that stage, we're truly just investing in people, right? Not necessarily the products. Because people build the products, right? So that in that case, we passed. Because if you go through sort of our thesis, we say very boldly that we don't invest in jerks, and actually knock on wood, 2 years later, our company didn't work out. I don't know if this was why it didn't work out, but we like to think we picked that one up. So yeah, that's sort of 2 examples of how this sort of plays out.
Makes sense. Very important, and something that doesn't get talked about enough. Culture, right? It's like at the very early stages, the company culture is very important. Over to you, Efosa.
Yeah, thank you. I know deep down at the back of your mind, you were like, man, I hope I didn't just pass up on Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was not necessarily a anyways. Good stuff. Thank you.
Well, I sometimes wonder about that, Efosa.
You're giving him a pass because he gave you an iPhone.
Steve, yeah, I sometimes wonder. I guess I will pass, being who I am and the kind of investor I am. If I did diligence on Steve and all of the things we now know were obvious, I would have passed it. I would have passed on. Again, yeah, I would have passed on it, and that's fine, right? You're not gonna get every win, but
how you look at win, right? Because win isn't only financial. Like for VP, it's clear that win isn't just numbers. In that case, you wouldn't have lost, I guess, passing on to Steve. But I hear you.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think about another thing. It's amazing how you're just bringing up things that Clay taught us over the years. He said, look, it's a lot easier to stick to your principles and integrity 100% of the time. And so when you make a decision, we're not going to invest in jerks. If you meet an amazing founder who's intellectual and brilliant and amazing, but he or she is a jerk, well, you've already made that decision. There's no need to start, oh, guys, let's make an exception here. It's like, look, you've made the decision, stick to your principles. So I think that.
No, and the data in our portfolio has proven itself. To be honest, I every time we've tried, and this is data, like real. This is real stats. Every time we've said, it's a very compelling business. We don't really like him. But we're gonna close our eyes and kind of check. Every time, it might take a year or 2 or 3. It always materializes. Always. So yes, we stick to our thesis. We stick to sort of our filter, and we try to just it is what it is. You're gonna pass them some.
Yeah.
So where I knew this was going to happen for this session. So we'll try to combine a few of the questions we have so that we can get to people's questions as quickly as possible. But one that really matters to me, and I've alluded to this earlier, is really about what's hard for investors. I think it's easy to look at investors and say, you guys have all the money, you're very stingy, you just don't like giving people money. You make us beg and email you 10 times. But I don't know that a lot of us appreciate what you have to go through in your daily work. So just help us understand what are some of the things that are really hard for investors.
First off is it's so easy to cut the check, but the hardest bit is returning the capital. You know, most people, I mean, in the early days, when I started off as an angel, I was investing my own money. So I could make these decisions very quickly in literally 30 minutes. It didn't matter. But as a VC fund, we also raise money from investors. In fact, I'm right in the middle of closing. Anyway, we also raise money from investors as well. And so it is a job. People think, founders often forget that, and so that tends to create misalignments. And so the hard part is really, we can't play Mr. Nice Guy as much as we're value driven, and our investments must deliver impact. We also have, I have a hurdle rate, for instance, on my fund, right, where I must deliver a return past a certain hurdle before before the company can make money on the upside. And so I think that is often the tricky part of the job that we do. I think also because we have such a large portfolio today, about 70 companies and counting. We also find that our founders can often think, they start to think that, oh, you've invested in a company that is somewhat similar to me, and the lines can get blurred, right? Because we're such an early stage investor. So that can often be a difficult topic for us. But we're ethics driven and values driven. We're ethics and values driven organization, and so that I think remains true to who we are. Ultimately, venture investing is a job. It's a cool sport now in the world with investors being the cool guys, but it's actually a difficult job with reporting obligations, ESG reporting, and a host of other things that are really not as exciting. Even though on the front end there's this veneer of an exciting lifestyle, it's actually quite the opposite. It's exciting, but it's a lot of hard work to qualify that.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's similar to writing a book. I tell people it's very hard for a writer. It's amazing, but it's hard work. We write and speak a lot about market creating innovations and how powerful they are. In fact, you alluded to them earlier. This one is personal to me, and I'm trying to get a sense for what is it going to take for more investors to deploy capital to support these types of innovations, and not necessarily just the innovations that service the top 5% of the population, but these like non-consumption seeking market creating innovations. What can I do as a proponent of this, but also what can your cohort, your folks do to support these types of innovations?
Yeah, first off, I think the work you guys do in educating people on what a market creating innovation is important. In the early days in the African tech ecosystem, there was an overemphasis on apps, on essentially shiny apps that basically just helped with someone. You could describe some of these things as sustaining innovations or what have you. But I think really coming to terms with the reality of what we have in Africa, which is large mass markets, low income. They don't necessarily have a smartphone or all have a smartphone. I mean, in the Q&A, someone is also talking about the fact that are we over optimizing for digital businesses? Really just saying, look, at the core of it, innovation is figuring out a better way to deliver a good or service, right? Or an enhancement, and understanding what this market rate, I think a lot of investment in education is really at the core of what's required, and just really understanding and maybe breaking down some of the successful market creating innovations in our market and using them as case studies so that entrepreneurs can really understand what it takes to build these kinds of innovations in the markets where we operate. We've drank the Kool-Aid at Ventures platform because we clearly see that it's probably one of the most rewarding ways to make deliver returns, but also make impacts on the continent. Because as you create this market, you literally lift millions of people out of poverty, and that is, that's ultimately why I do venture, because if you can make profit and make that kind of impact, boy, nothing better than that. Nothing better than that.
That's entrepreneurial gospel right there.
We're gonna keep doing that, and we're gonna double down on some of our efforts to really spread the word, and some of the things you've talked about. We'll take that in. Also,
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just on the same train of thoughts, really, with the last comment you made, Kola, around impact. I guess we're trying to understand how impact influences your investment decisions. Obviously, quite a lot with your thesis and MCIs. Impact is obviously a very broad term as well. So maybe contextualizing what that means for VP. From my role with the University of Toronto, supporting Black entrepreneurs, obviously there's a big EDI spin on how we quantify impact. From the work I do with African Impact, we actually, FSA 1 is on our advisory board, and same thing, we formed that challenge after reading that book, literally. So impact from us is also, non-consumption, but what does that look like for VP, and how does that influence your decision making when you're picking founders and startups?
Yeah, great. So first of all, the base of it is we only fund what we call painkillers that are targeting mass markets, right? So we're funding innovations for, you can call it the bottom of the pyramid. We like to call it low-income mass markets. Secondly, is that we have a very clear exclusion list. The Ventures platform as a fund will not fund gambling. We have certain exclusions that we just won't fund. But why we are not an impact fund in the classic sense, we fundamentally believe that our thesis around market creating innovations that solve non-consumption for people and businesses largely lends itself to the goal of lifting folks out of poverty on the continent, and so we spend a lot of time looking at the business models to ensure that the business models are inclusive, to ensure that the business models guarantee a decent living to all the participants in that business model, because you've got all these business models now where you have the questions are dropping, so I'm a little distracted by the question. Yeah, you've got all these business models that have various participants that are not necessarily directly employees, but are part of this network model. And so we spent time sort of looking at those business models as well. Currently, we're now onboarding a new group of investors, and so we have really strict ESG monitoring expectations of our portfolio, of our incoming portfolio as well. In a nutshell, we look at 6 core verticals, which we believe are at the heart of the non-consumption we see on the continent. And so we're looking at sort of financial services and insurance tech. We're looking at agri-tech and food security. We're looking at health tech, the biosciences. We also fund ed tech and digital talent acceleration. We look at enterprise SaaS because we also believe that the non-consumption in Africa that is so acute is not only with people, but also with businesses. And finally, we also look at what we call digital infrastructure, which is a catch-all bucket for everything that falls under that infrastructure layer type business. So those are the 6 core verticals that we fund, and we invest from 25K all the way to $1 million.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fosa, I totally forgot. We have a poll that we're going to ask you to please fill out maybe 5 minutes before we close. So apologies, I didn't mention this earlier. So please stick around for that. I know we're towards the end and we'd like to start taking some questions. But before we open up for questions, Kola, how do you like your water, still or sparkling, please? Oh, you're muted. You're muted.
On a regular day, I drink still, but when I'm on a flight and I want to feel posh, I sometimes ask for sparkling. But I'm a still guy, man. I'm not with all that sparkling water stuff. And I wear t-shirts. I was telling Jacob in the beginning that before I became a VC, I would wear jackets all the time. And then when I would go to meetings on the continent with startups, people will say, sir, will call me sir. And I'm like, dude, don't call me sir. And then I realized it was a jacket. So now I just wear t-shirt and I drink still water.
Team still, awesome. I love it.
Awesome. So let me take the first question, and then if also you can continue on. Dr. Bernadette says, okay, what then is your definition of impact? And so when you look back at your investments, like how would you define it? Is it people lifted out of poverty, people helped by this new innovation?
Yeah, so again, you can define impact in various ways, but for us, if you go on our website, our goal is to create prosperity on the continent, whether it's by offering people the ability to transfer value or whether it's a company like Thrive Agric that we funded that's helping small scale farmers improve their yield, whether it's PiggyVest that's helping low income millennials save and stretch their income. For us, our core goal is to improve prosperity on the continent, and that's at the heart of every investment that we make in some way, somehow.
Makes sense. And another question someone has here, I guess more on the aspiring investor angle. Dimeji asks around how one can become an angel investor. Is there a cap limit? How does one get introduced, etc.? I'm not sure if VP does any kind of co-investing, but I guess what would be your answer to Dimeji on a high level?
Yeah, today, thankfully, there are a number of syndicate groups that you can join. You've got Future Africa. You've got my good friend runs one called Voltron. You've got, and I also happen to chair the board of the Lagos Angel Network that you can join. Check it out online. It's the most vibrant angel network in Nigeria. And then your other option is to try to invest in a micro fund. There's a couple of those that you can participate in. But yes, I hope that helps.
That does, yeah.
Okay, I don't know if this is too technical a question, but what is your cost of capital when you look at an investment? What is the minimum risk-adjusted return on capital that you expect as a hurdle? Is it financial, social? What that might get it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah. So first off, like I said already, we are not an impact fund. However, we would not invest in, like I said, we have a very clear exclusion list of vertical sectors we would not invest in. Our funds do have a hurdle rate. So we are looking to, from a commercial standpoint, we need to meet our hurdle rate for every vintage that we invest in. And so in the early days, we would look at investments and try to see if the investments could deliver a minimum return on the fund. But that's gotten a bit more complex. And so you can call it triple bottom line, but we're certainly looking at, we're scaling our operations now to where we're now measuring, we have a bunch of ESG measures that we have to sort of measure from our portfolio investments. But I'm very quick to say we are not an impact fund, even though we believe very strongly that there's no better way to make impact than investing in the kind of companies we support. because again, you've got to balance that with sustainability, right?
Definitely. Okay, another anonymous attendee is asking around African countries missing their industrial revolution. So he's asking, have we missed our industrial revolutions, and where are you seeing the most promise in the startup space for manufacturing and industrial deepening? And then finally, there's an overemphasis on digital enabled businesses by investors risk, exacerbating that neglect in those other sectors.
Yes, so I'll take the last part of that question. Absolutely, there is an overemphasis on digital, but this is because we've got a large youthful population that lends itself to digital, but also because the return horizon for digital scalability is a lot easier, and so it lends itself to sort of a closer return horizon, so to say. Some of the other industrial sectors tend to be more capital intensive, but there are investors focused on these verticals. Again, I represent a kind of investor, and I represent, I'm not, there's all sorts of flavors of the week in the market these days, right? I know infrastructure investors, I know agri-focused investors. We invest in use cases that can be enabled by innovation and technology more broadly, right? But this doesn't mean we're only investing in apps. I mean, one of our most successful portfolio companies is scaling low income but high quality medical diagnostic centers in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, starting with Nigeria. Companies called MDAS. Yeah, MDAS doing phenomenal work. That's not an app, so yeah.
And shameless plug for whoever asked that question, we're going to be having all those different vertical focused investors in the next year when we do like 2.0 of this. So make sure you stay tuned and join in. I know we have a poll, so maybe we can quickly launch.
Let's launch the poll, please. But as we're launching the poll, we want to let you know too. Thank you for that plug, Efosa. Part of our plan for next year is we want to have specific sessions that are geared towards certain types of investors, right? Some of you have asked, what sectors does Kola invest in? Does the fund invest in? Well, you can imagine if we had a session such as like what fintech investors want, right? And we would invite investors who have made these types of investments so they can give us really targeted information of what are they seeing in the space? How are they investing? So Kola talked about layers, right? Paystack, PiggyVest, and so on. And so we want to work on that because our goal ultimately is how can we create events like this that help you on your journey? That is the goal. If this is not helping you on your journey, then we are gonna take a step back and put a pause. Ultimately, because I see someone ask for Kola's email address, my guess is he probably gets a lot of emails. So, ultimately, we want to build this into an ecosystem where we can probably even make these connections for you, right? So to Kola's point about investors appreciate the warm introductions, well, could we be that sort of institution if we do this right that helps with some of those warm introductions? Again, with the goal of making your lives easier as you do the hard work of building amazing organizations that ultimately help create prosperity for and help people across the world. So help us with the poll, send us information and ideas that you have. And we would certainly appreciate this. We're all very available on Twitter and LinkedIn and so on. So thank you so much. Efosa, what am I missing? Because Efosa number 2.0 is a lot better than 1.0.
No, I want to thank you, Efosa 1, for the opportunity to collaborate on this. It's been an exciting ride. We've had I think 250 for Lisa's session registered. We had 217 for the one before this, and we had 350 for this one. I know this one we had a little scheduling change, so that's part of the learning experience, but it's been a great experience so far. And thank you for all those who've joined us on all three. Like I've seen a lot of people from today that joined, the first and the second. Like Efosa once said, lots coming in the new year, and we want you to help us to help you to do your job of building properly. And obviously thanking Kola for the amazing conversation. This has been one of the more, this one we couldn't stick to time because of how good it was. So thank you so much, Kola, for joining us as well.
Thanks everyone. Have a good night. Take care. I'll wear a jacket next time, Efosa.
No worries. But yeah, I want to just say thank you, Jacob and Tina, for the behind the scenes work. U of T, Christensen Institute, appreciate you guys giving us this platform. And our first couple guests, right? Luis and Clemens, thank you for really kicking this off. And Kola, again, thank you for ending this pilot for us. We appreciate it. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.